The first bullet didn't whistle past as a warning. It shattered the crystal flute in General Petrov's hand, a spray of expensive champagne and razor-sharp shards catching the late afternoon sun. For Captain Ava Rostova, the world did not slow down. It snapped into a hyper-focused reality. The sound of the gunshot, a sharp crack from the palace roof, reached her a split second later. The laughter and clinking glasses of the diplomatic reception died, replaced by a frozen, heart-stopping silence. Then the screaming began. Her hand, which had moments before been resting casually near the stem of her own wine glass, was now a blur of motion. It found the familiar textured grip of her holstered Sig Sauer P320. The smooth, practiced motion of drawing the weapon was as natural as breathing. Her dress blues, usually a symbol of protocol and ceremony, were now just another layer between her and the threat. Her eyes, a cool and assessing gray, swept the sun-drenched courtyard, instantly identifying the primary threat, the muzzle flash from the ornate stone balustrade of the roof, and the secondary, more immediate one. The crowd, a seething, panicked mass of silk, suits, and sheer terror, it was now the perfect cover for any additional assassins on the ground. "General, with me? Now." Her voice was not a shout, but a low, commanding tone that cut through the chaos. It brooked no argument. It was the voice of a soldier, not a diplomat. General Petrov, a man who had commanded armies, whose face was a map of a lifetime of hard decisions, met her gaze. For a fleeting moment, she saw something other than command in his eyes. A flicker of something personal, something that squeezed her heart. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the hardened resolve of a veteran. He gave a sharp single nod. She didn't wait. Grabbing his arm, she propelled him forward, away from the open center of the courtyard. Her mind was a tactical computer, calculating trajectories and cover. A heavy, ornately carved oak table, laden with the remnants of canapes and abandoned desserts, was their only viable option. With a grunt of effort, she shoved it, sending porcelain and glass crashing to the marble floor. "Get down!" she commanded, pushing him behind the solid wooden barrier, just as a second volley of shots rang out. Splinters of wood exploded from the table's edge, raining down on them. The sharp, acrid smell of cordite began to mix with the scent of spilled wine and fear. Eva rose to a crouch, her sidearm held in a steady two-handed grip. She peered over the edge of the table. The sniper was repositioning. She saw the movement, a dark shape against the bright sky. She had one chance. She took a single, calming breath, letting half of it out. The world narrowed to her front sight and the target. She squeezed the trigger. Once, twice. The reports from her pistol were sharp, definitive sounds against the cacophony. The first shot chipped the stone near the sniper's head. The second found its mark. The dark shape jerked and then tumbled over the balustrade, landing with a sickening final thud in the courtyard below. One threat neutralized, but the silence that followed was more terrifying than the gunfire. It was the silence of a hunt not yet over. It was in that silence that she heard them. The deliberate, steady footsteps of trained men advancing through the chaos. They were not running. They were methodical. They were coming for the general. And they were between her and any possible exit. Her hand dropped to her hip, her fingers brushing against the single spare magazine she carried. It felt terribly, terrifyingly light. The silence was a lie. It was a fragile, thin sheet of ice over a lake of violence, and Ava could feel it cracking beneath her. The deliberate, crunching footsteps of the advancing fire team were the only sound now, a methodical beat against the marble floor. 3 sets. They were spreading out, using the overturned chairs and terrified, huddled guests as cover. They were not amateurs. They were professionals, and their target was the man breathing heavily behind the splintered oak table. Her father, her mind, for a single, treacherous second, was not in the palace courtyard. It was in a small, cold apartment in Moscow, standing before a woman with the same gray eyes as her own, a woman whose smile was tired, but whose spine was straight as a rifle barrel. Her mother, Svetlana, a portrait in a simple frame on a dusty mantelpiece, a woman whose official record listed her as a clerk, but whose hands bore the telltale calluses of a field operative. The memory was a stab of cold grief, so sharp it was almost physical. The general's voice, low and strained, pulled her back. "Rostova, status!" He was a soldier to his core, even now. "3 hostiles, sir. Ground level. Flanking maneuver." Her own voice was a calm she did not feel. Her fingers did a quick automatic check of her weapon. 15 rounds in the magazine. 1 in the chamber. 16 chances to keep a promise. "Your mother would have secured the east veranda exit by now," he said, his words barely a whisper. It was not a criticism. It was a statement of fact, and a shared, painful history laid bare in the middle of a firefight. That was the unspoken agreement, the ghost that haunted their every interaction. She had joined the service not for glory or for country, but to finish the work her mother had started, to protect the man her mother had loved, the man who was her father in blood but never in name. Her entire career, every promotion, every assignment, had been a silent, desperate effort to earn a place at his side, to be worthy of the secret they shared. The first attacker broke from behind a stone pillar. Ava's body moved before her mind fully registered the threat. She rose, her sidearm a seamless extension of her will. 2 shots. The first struck his body armor, staggering him. The second, a carefully adjusted aim, caught him in the thigh. He went down with a choked cry, his weapon clattering away. 15 rounds left. 2 hostiles! "Eva, the perimeter!" the general urged, his voice tight. "You can flank them from the left." It was a sound, tactical suggestion. It was also a way to get her to safety. She shook her head, her eyes never leaving the last known position of the remaining 2 men. "Negative, sir. My mission is here. My promise is here," she thought. She remembered another order given to her mother decades ago, a mission from which she never returned. A mission the general had signed off on. The ghost of that decision hung between them now, a chasm of regret and unspoken blame. He had chosen duty over family once. She would not make the same choice. A grenade skittered across the floor, coming to a rest 10 feet from their position. It was not a fragmentation grenade, but a flashbang. They wanted him alive, but incapacitated. Ava reacted on pure instinct. She shoved the general down harder, turning her own face away and squeezing her eyes shut. The world exploded in a deafening roar and a blinding, pure white light. Even with her eyes closed, the flash seared through her eyelids. The concussive wave hit the table, shaking it to its core. Her ears rang, a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. She was blind and deaf, vulnerable in a way that sent a spike of pure terror through her veins. She had nothing now but her training and her promise, and in the ringing, blinding silence, she knew the final assault was beginning. The world was a blur of smeared light and a deafening, high-pitched ring. Ava blinked rapidly, trying to force her vision to clear. Shapes swam in and out of focus. The flashbang had stolen her senses, leaving her disoriented and vulnerable. She could feel the general stirring beside her, his movements sluggish. He was a big man, a formidable commander, but now he was dazed and relying entirely on her. The weight of that responsibility was a physical pressure on her chest. She gripped her pistol tighter, the textured polymer of the grip digging into her palm. It was the only real thing in this disorienting haze. She had to rely on touch, on instinct. She could make out 2 dark shapes moving toward them through the bright, blurry smear of the courtyard. They were advancing quickly, knowing their temporary advantage was slipping away. They were not running. Their movements were economical, precise. They were closing the net. Her hearing began to return, the piercing ring fading into a muffled roar, like listening to the world from underwater. She could hear the faint crunch of glass under their boots, the ragged sound of her own breathing. She risked a glance over the table. The 2 men were now only 20 feet away, their weapons raised. They were not aiming to kill. They were aiming to suppress, to pin her down until they could overwhelm their position. She made a split-second decision. She couldn't win a direct firefight, not against 2 assault rifles. She had to break their rhythm, create confusion. She rose to a crouch and fired 2 rapid shots not at the men, but at the large crystal chandelier hanging above the area they had just passed under. The sharp crack of her pistol was followed by a much louder, shattering cacophony. The chandelier exploded, raining 1,000 shards of crystal and twisted metal down upon the attackers. One of them cried out, throwing his arms up to protect his face. The other was forced to duck and scramble for new cover. It had bought them maybe 5 seconds. Precious fleeting seconds. She dropped back behind the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. She did a quick mental count. 12 rounds left. The math was a cold, hard fist closing around her heart. 12 rounds against 2 heavily armed professionals. The odds were impossible. "Eva!" The general's voice was stronger now, his senses returning. He looked at her, his eyes scanning her face, and for the first time, she saw something there beyond command, beyond the hardened exterior of the general. She saw a flicker of fear. Not for himself, but for her. "The west pillar. There's a service entrance behind it. If you provide covering fire, I can make it." She knew what he was doing. He was offering himself as a distraction, a target to draw their fire so she could survive. It was a soldier's sacrifice, a father's sacrifice. The ghost of her mother seemed to stand between them in that moment, a silent witness to this terrible, repeated history. He was trying to send her away, just as he had sent her mother away on a mission that ended in a nameless grave. Her jaw tightened. A cold, clear resolve washed over her, burning away the last of the disorientation from the flashbang. "No, sir," she said, her voice low and final. "We hold here." She met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw not the subordinate officer, but the determined daughter. He saw Svetlana's unyielding spirit staring back at him. He saw the promise he had extracted from a grieving young girl, a promise to be careful, a promise to live, a promise she was now choosing to interpret in her own way. She would not leave him. Not again, not ever. She ejected the partially spent magazine, slapping the fresh one into the grip with a sharp, definitive click. The sound was a declaration of war. She had 16 rounds once more. 16 chances to change their fate. The 2 attackers, having recovered from the shower of crystal, were now advancing again, their weapons leveled. This time there was no hesitation in their steps. They knew the game was ending. The 2 operatives moved with a renewed and chilling purpose. The brief chaos of the falling chandelier was behind them. Now they advanced in a low, tactical crouch, their assault rifles held tight, their movements a synchronized dance of death. They knew she was low on options and likely low on ammunition. They were methodically closing the final distance, cutting off any possible line of retreat. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with the certainty of a final, violent conclusion. Eva's mind was a calm, cold center in the storm. She analyzed their approach. The lead man was focused on her position, his rifle aimed squarely at the table, ready to fire at the first sign of movement. The second man was hanging back slightly, his head on a swivel, covering his partner and watching their flanks. They were good, but they had made one critical mistake. They were underestimating her. They saw a woman in a dress uniform, armed only with a pistol. They did not see the years of brutal training, the countless hours on the range, the ghost of a mother who had been one of the most feared operatives of her generation. She made a decision. She would use their arrogance against them. "General," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "On my mark, you will move to the right behind the stone planter. Do not stop. Do not look back." He began to protest, a low grunt of refusal, but the look in her eyes silenced him. It was not a request. It was a commander giving an order. It was a daughter making a choice. She took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the cool metal of the pistol in her hands. She focused on the second man, the one providing cover. He was the key. If she could neutralize him, the lead man would be isolated, forced to split his attention. It was a desperate gamble. She would have to expose herself completely. "Now!" she hissed. In one fluid motion, she rose from behind the shattered table. She did not aim at the lead man charging toward her. She ignored him completely, an act of sheer tactical defiance. Her entire world narrowed to the second operative, 20 feet away. She saw his eyes widen in surprise behind his sights. He had not expected this. He had expected her to cower. He swung his rifle toward her. Eva fired twice. The shots were rapid, precise. The first round struck the barrel of his rifle, sparking as it ricocheted away and wrenching the weapon from his grasp. The second shot hit him high in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry of pain and shock. He was out of the fight, but her gamble had a cost. The lead operative, now only 10 feet away, opened fire. The roar of the assault rifle was deafening at this range. Bullets tore into the table, splinters of wood exploding like shrapnel. One round grazed her upper arm, a searing line of fire that made her gasp. The impact spun her, throwing off her balance. She stumbled back, her pistol swinging wildly toward the new immediate threat. He was almost on her. She could see the cold, determined look in his eyes through his balaclava. He knew she was wounded. He knew she was off balance. He lowered his weapon, preparing to use it as a club to finish the job at close quarters. Time seemed to stretch, each fraction of a second lasting an eternity. She tried to bring her pistol to bear, but her arm was numb, her movements slowed by shock and pain. The dark shape of the rifle stock filled her vision, coming down toward her head. This was it. This was the end. Her final thought was not of fear, but of a quiet, profound sadness that she had failed after all. The rifle stock descended in a brutal, short arc aimed at her temple. There was no time to aim her pistol, no time to dodge. Instinct older than training took over. Ava threw her left arm up in a desperate block, deflecting the blow from her head to her shoulder. A jolt of numbing agony exploded through her arm and side. The force of the impact sent her crashing to the marble floor, her pistol skittering from her grasp. The world swam in a dizzying blur of pain and disorientation. She lay exposed, defenseless at the feet of her killer. He stood over her, a dark silhouette against the bright sky. He ejected his spent magazine, the empty cartridge clattering on the floor beside her head, and smoothly slapped a fresh one into the rifle. The final chilling click of the bolt being chambered was the sound of her death sentence. He was taking no more chances. This was an execution. He raised the weapon, the dark muzzle pointed squarely at her chest. A lifetime seemed to flash before her eyes. Not her own, but her mother's. She saw the faded photograph on the mantel. She saw the quiet pride in her mother's eyes the day she graduated from the academy, a pride that could never be spoken aloud. She saw the general's face, usually a mask of stoic control, soften for just a moment when he thought no one was looking. She had spent her whole life trying to earn a place in his world, to be a soldier he could be proud of, to be a daughter worthy of the secret they shared. And now it would end here, on a cold marble floor, a failure. A profound, crushing sorrow washed over her, more powerful than the fear. She had broken her promise. From the corner of her eye, she saw a sudden movement. A blur of blue and gold. General Petrov, ignoring her command, had not retreated to safety. He had not stayed behind cover. With a raw, guttural roar that tore from a place of pure paternal fury, he launched himself from behind the planter. He was not a young man, but in that moment, he was a force of nature. He slammed into the operative with the full weight of his body, driving him away from Ava. The two men crashed to the floor in a tangled heap. The assault rifle discharged, the shot going wild and ricocheting off a pillar with a sharp whine. The operative, younger and stronger, quickly recovered, shoving the general off with a brutal heave. He scrambled for his weapon, his focus now entirely on the new, unexpected threat. The few seconds he had bought her were a gift of life itself. The fog of pain and shock burned away in the white-hot furnace of adrenaline. Her training reasserted itself with cold, brutal clarity. Her pistol? She needed her pistol. She pushed herself up, her wounded arm screaming in protest. Her eyes scanned the glittering, debris-strewn floor. There, it lay 5 feet away near the leg of the overturned table. The operative had his rifle again. He was turning it toward the general, who was now struggling to get to his feet, unarmed and vulnerable. There was no time to reach the pistol, no time to shout a warning. There was only one thing left to do. Ava launched herself forward, not toward her weapon, but toward the operative's legs. It was a clumsy, desperate tackle, but it was enough. She collided with him just as his finger found the trigger. Another burst of gunfire chewed into the marble where the general had been a moment before. The operative snarled, kicking her away with a brutal force that stole the air from her lungs. She landed hard, gasping, her vision dimming at the edges. He stood over both of them now, the general and the daughter, his chest heaving with rage. He raised the rifle one last time, deciding which one to kill first. The hunt was over. He had them both. Ava's hand stretched out, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of her fallen sidearm. It was an inch beyond her reach. It might as well have been a mile. Her fingertips brushed the cold, textured grip of the Sig Sauer. It was so close, a mere inch of polished marble separating her from salvation. But that inch was an impossible chasm. The operative stood over them, a predator savoring the final moment of the kill. He shifted his aim slightly, pointing the rifle at the general, who was now on his knees, his face a mask of grim acceptance. He would make her watch. He would take the father first. A strange, almost supernatural calm settled over Ava. This was not how her mother's story ended. Her mother had died in the shadows, her sacrifice unknown, her name unspoken. Ava would not let that happen to him. His legacy, their secret, would not be erased on this bloody floor. With a final desperate surge of strength that came from a place deeper than muscle or bone, she pushed herself forward. Her body screamed in protest, the wound in her arm a blaze of fresh agony. But her hand closed around the pistol. The operative heard the movement and began to swing the rifle back toward her. It was too late. She was already rolling onto her back, the pistol rising in her hand. There was no time to aim, no time for a proper sight picture. This was pure instinct, a culmination of 1,000 hours of training and a lifetime of a daughter's love. She pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the confined space. The bullet struck the operative in the side of his neck, just above the edge of his body armor. A spray of crimson arced through the air. He staggered, a look of profound shock etched onto the small part of his face visible below the balaclava. His finger clenched on the trigger of his rifle, sending a final wild burst of automatic fire into the vaulted ceiling. Then his legs buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his weapon clattering beside him. Silence. It was a heavy, profound silence, broken only by the ragged, gasping breaths of the two survivors. The ringing in Ava's ears returned, a high-pitched whine that was the only sound in her world. She lay on her back, staring up at the beautiful, ornate ceiling, her chest heaving. The pistol felt like a lead weight in her hand. She could not move. The adrenaline that had sustained her was gone, leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. Then a shadow fell over her. General Petrov was there, his dress uniform torn and smeared with dust and blood. He knelt beside her, his movements slow, his own breath coming in short pants. His face, usually so stern and unreadable, was a battlefield of emotions, shock, relief, and a dawning, overwhelming awe. He looked from the dead operative to the woman lying at his feet. He did not speak. Words were inadequate, fragile things that would shatter in the face of what had just happened. Instead, he reached out a hand. It was trembling. He gently pried the pistol from her numb fingers, setting it aside on the floor. Then his hand moved to her wounded arm, applying firm pressure to the graze, the practical act of a soldier stemming the flow of blood. His other hand, however, did something entirely unpracticed. It came to rest on her forehead, pushing a strand of sweat-soaked hair from her eyes. The gesture was infinitely tender, a father's touch. His thumb gently stroked her temple, a silent communication that bypassed rank and secrecy and went straight to the heart of who they were. In that touch, she felt it all. The years of hidden pride, the shared grief for her mother, the terrifying fear of a parent who had almost lost his child, and the profound, humbling gratitude of a man whose life had been saved. He was not thanking Captain Rostova. He was comforting his daughter. And in the quiet aftermath of the storm, that was the only recognition she would ever need. The silence did not last. The distant wail of sirens, growing rapidly louder, pierced the strange, intimate bubble that had formed around them. The sound of booted feet, heavy and urgent, began to echo through the palace corridors as security forces, finally breaching the perimeter, stormed into the courtyard. Shouted commands and the crackle of radios filled the air, shattering the fragile peace. The spell was broken. General Petrov's hand lingered on her forehead for a second longer, a final, private caress, before it withdrew. The mask of the commander began to reassemble itself on his face, but it was different now. The steel was still there, but the coldness was gone, replaced by a weary, hard-won resolve. He kept the pressure on her wounded arm, his voice low but firm as he called out to the approaching soldiers. "Medic, we have a wounded officer here!" Ava tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness and nausea washing over her. "I'm fine, sir," she insisted, her voice hoarse. It was a lie, and they both knew it. She was trembling from head to toe, a combination of shock, blood loss, and the sheer physiological crash after the fight for her life. A team of medics in tactical gear rushed over, quickly but gently moving the general aside to assess her. As they began to cut away the sleeve of her dress uniform to treat the gunshot graze, Ava's eyes remained locked on the general. He stood now, surrounded by a flock of anxious aides and senior security personnel, all clamoring for his attention, for orders, for a debrief. He was once again the VIP, the center of the storm, the man whose survival would be analyzed and celebrated. He answered their questions with terse, clipped sentences, his gaze constantly flicking back to her. He was physically present with them, but his attention was anchored to the medic working on her arm. An aide tried to steer him away toward a secured vehicle, toward safety. The general shook his head, a sharp, definitive gesture. "I am not leaving until Captain Rostova is stabilized," he stated, his voice brooking no argument. The aides exchanged surprised glances. It was an unusual, personal insistence from a man known for his icy pragmatism. One of the medics injected a local anesthetic into her wound, the sharp sting pulling her focus back to her own body. As the numbness spread, the throbbing pain receded, leaving behind a deep, pervasive ache. A blanket was draped over her shoulders, and she realized for the first time that she was shivering uncontrollably. A cup of water was pressed into her hands. She drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. Through the bustling activity, she watched as the general pointed toward the body of the operative she had killed. "That one," he said to a security chief, his voice dropping, becoming confidential. "I want a full forensic workup. I want to know who sent him." His eyes then scanned the courtyard, taking in the other casualties, the shattered chandelier, the bullet-riddled table. His gaze finally returned to her, and in that look, she saw the tactical mind already reconstructing the event, analyzing every move she had made, every shot she had fired. He was not just a grateful father. He was a general reviewing a battlefield where a single soldier, against impossible odds, had held the line. And that soldier was his daughter. The pride in his eyes now was no longer a hidden, secret thing. It was plain for anyone to see, a silent testament to her skill, her courage, and her sacrifice. He had witnessed it all. He knew what she had done, and more importantly, he knew why she had done it. The secret they shared was no longer a burden. In the wreckage of the courtyard, it had become their unbreakable bond. The sterile white light of the secure medical facility was a stark contrast to the golden haze of the courtyard. Ava sat on the edge of a hospital bed, the sleeve of her uniform neatly cut away, her arm bandaged and resting in a sling. A military doctor had pronounced her fit, though the deep ache in her body and the tremor in her hands told a different story. The door opened and General Petrov entered alone. The buzz of the command center, the politicians, the debriefings, it was all left outside. Here, in this quiet room, it was just the two of them. He stood before her for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture ramrod straight, but his eyes were soft. "The forensics team confirmed it," he began, his voice low. "The same group. The ones responsible for your mother?" The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The attack had not been a random act of terrorism. It was a deliberate, final attempt to settle a decades-old score. Ava's actions had not just saved a general. She had avenged her mother. He took a step closer. "There will be no public ceremony, Ava, no medal. What happened today, the full truth of it, must remain within these walls. You understand the necessity." It was not a question. She nodded slowly. She had always understood. Their lives were built on secrets. However, he continued, and his voice changed, losing its official tone and becoming profoundly personal. "There is a debt that must be paid, a recognition that cannot be written in a file." He unclasped his hands. In his right palm lay a small, tarnished silver locket, its surface worn smooth with age. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She recognized it instantly from the old photograph. It was her mother's. This was all she had on her when she was found, the general said, his voice thick with a grief he had carried for 20 years. "I have kept it, waiting for the right moment." I thought perhaps when you graduated or when you made captain, but no moment ever seemed worthy. He reached out and took her left hand, the one not in the sling, and pressed the cool metal into her palm, closing her fingers around it. You proved me wrong today. There could be no moment more worthy than this. Tears, which she had fought back through the pain and the fear, now welled in her eyes, spilling over and tracing clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. The locket felt impossibly heavy in her hand, a tangible connection to the past, a symbol of a promise kept. She had not just protected a general. She had completed her mother's final unfinished mission. He did not try to comfort her. He simply stood there, allowing her this moment of raw emotion, his own eyes glistening. Your mother was the bravest woman I ever knew, he said softly. Until today. He let the words settle, a supreme and final accolade. The paperwork is already being processed. Your transfer is approved. You will report to the Vimple Special Operations Directorate next month. Your skills, your judgment, they are wasted in ceremonial duties. This was the recognition that mattered, not a piece of ribbon, but his unwavering belief in her abilities, his trust to place her in the field, to continue the real work. It was his way of finally, fully, accepting her not just as a daughter, but as a peer, as a warrior. He gave a final slow nod, a look of immense quiet pride passing between them. Then he turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Ava was alone. She looked down at the locket in her hand, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. She undid the tiny clasp. Inside was not a photograph, but a small folded square of paper, brittle with age. She carefully unfolded it. In her mother's elegant script, it read, "Protect him, my little Eva, for both of us." A sob escaped her, a release of a lifetime of pressure. She had done it. With nothing but her sidearm and a daughter's love, she had fulfilled her mother's last wish. She leaned back against the pillow, clutching the locket to her chest, the ghosts of the past finally at peace, and her own future, for the first time, shining brightly ahead.